In this video, we will look at how to create two different clipping masks. I have two layers set up, Texture 1 as well as a layer called Texture 2. On our Texture 1 layer, I have downloaded a gold foil texture. Here it is. It's placed on our Texture 1 layer. I'll select my Texture 2 layer and I'll drag and drop a second foil texture. This one's purple. The first one was gold. Holding down Shift and Alt so I can scale this from the center. I'll increase the size of this texture a bit. So, gold foil on Texture 1, purple foil on Texture 2. What we will do is create a few shapes on a new layer. I'll create a new layer, and on it I'll make a few shapes. It is important that the shapes you create have a fill. You'll notice that the rectangles I'm making have a white fill and a black stroke. I now have 4 rectangles on layer 3. What I'm going to do is expand my layers so that I can see the sublayers or the images and geometry that are on these layers. We'll start with this rectangle. Once I have it selected, you'll notice that this little green dot appears. That is the selected artwork. We're going to drag that to the layer called Texture 2. Notice we now have 2 items on our Texture 2 layer, the rectangle, which we've moved there, as well as the foil image. I'm going to take the remaining 3 squares and I'm going to bring them to my Texture 1 layer by clicking and holding and dragging and dropping. Layer 3 is now empty. I'm going to delete it. And we will show both of our other layers to see that geometry. I'm going to take my foil and I'm going to bring it up so that the foil is completely underneath this rectangle. On my Texture 2, you'll notice I have 2 images, 2 objects. With Texture 2 selected, I will hover on this little button at the bottom that says Make or Release Clipping Mask. When I select it, that rectangle becomes a window into the layer, and only what is within that window will show. So all of the excess geometry or excess picture from this picture file is now hidden. All we see is what is shown through that rectangle. I'm going to lock and hide that layer, and we will show our gold foil layer. Notice on this layer, Texture 1, we have 4 images. The photo, as well as 3 rectangles. The rectangle on top is this rectangle right here. When I select Make or Release Clipping Mask, the only object that becomes the clipping mask or the window into that layer is the object that's on top of our list. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Another thing you could do is press this Release Clipping Mask and it will release. Notice that the rectangle that we had doesn't have a stroke or a fill. I will refill that with the stroke and fill of one of our other objects. In order to have all 3 of these rectangles be part of the clipping mask, we will select all of them. So holding Shift, I can select multiple objects from my layer menu, or I can select them with the black arrow, holding Shift in my artboard or on my artboard. All 3 objects are selected. Underneath our Object menu, we're going to go down to Compound Path, and we're going to select Make with all 3 objects selected. If you look back to our layers, we now have what's called a compound path created from these three shapes. If I select Texture 1 as my main layer and select Make Clipping Mask, you'll now see that these three objects are part of the clipping mask. I will collapse and lock that layer, and then I will also show my Texture 2 layer. Texture 2 is a simpler clipping mask with only one shape. Texture 1 was a bit more complex because we needed to take our three shapes and create a compound path in order to successfully show through our texture in those three objects.